Welcome to the Know Your Legacy podcast. I'm your host, Vipul Basania, and today's guest is Ross Simmonds. Ross is a storyteller, entrepreneur, and content marketer. He's the founder of the inspirational e-commerce brand Hustle and Grind. He believes in the art of experimentation to improve your life and your business, and ran Fishkin from Moz actually says that Ross serves the right message to the right people, and if you get a chance to work with him, definitely take it. He's been featured on Forbes, Huffington Post, and Venturebeat, plus many more. Ross, pleasure having you on, man.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dive in and chat with you. We've been coordinating this for a bit, so I'm pumped. It's been a long time overdue. I'm excited to chat.
No, definitely, likewise. So first things first, some of the content that I checked out, earlier on, and some of the conversations we're having, you were talking about experimentation. So the one thing I want to know, and I want to sort of get into, is first of all, what's the importance of experimentation, and how can we use it to improve our life?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So for me, the idea of experimentation comes from really at the core, it just being like a thing that all of us need to embrace. The reason why is simple. For years, when you think about the best inventions, the best creations, the best things that have kind of shaped our world, it all comes from experiments. People experimented to create penicillin. People experimented to come up with cures to diseases, to come up with things like Snapchat Zoom, that ability, like all of those things came out of experiments. Even if you want to go down to like pumpkin spice lattes and Velcro, like those things all came from experiments. So in my mind, I think that personally and professionally, we should look at experimentation as a way to learn things, also a way to kind of understand the world and our industry and people as in general a little bit better. Because when you experiment with things, the more you tinker, the more you can get a chance to kind of unlock new opportunities. So I really think that that's where experimentation is so important. And I encourage it both from a professional and personal level, like experiment with doing some crazy things on the weekend by going skydiving or going out and trying a new restaurant. Like, don't be afraid to experiment with different cultures and go and try different events. But on a professional sense, like, don't be afraid to experiment with different tools, with different strategies, with different ideas, and even launching different projects, which is something that I've done consistently. For a few years, I had this idea that every single month I would try to like master a new tool and try to figure out a way to leverage a new channel. And through all of that experimentation, I've been able to kind of build my career and talk about how you can experiment with Reddit and find success, how you can experiment with SlideShare and find success, experiment with Facebook groups, like all of these different tools, all because I've embraced that idea of experimenting.
For sure, definitely. I think that's an important thing for anyone to embrace, because if you don't go out and try something, you're never going to know what works and what doesn't, and you're never pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And it reminds me of a book. I don't know if you've read this book, but it's Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson.
No, I'm not familiar with it. No.
Really good book. I think it's right behind me anyway. I've got this stack of
cool
books there, and definitely highly recommend for you guys, for you listeners, to read it, and yourself as well if you haven't.
Awesome.
But he talks about, in terms of an idea, he talks about it being like an adjacent possible. So what he means by that is, so you have a thought, but adjacent to that thought is just another possibility of another thought. And the more thoughts you can connect like that, or 360 around that initial thought, the more you can explore what's possible behind that thought.
That's interesting.
As you start to connect it, that's one of many building blocks in terms of how to get a good idea. And he breaks it down, and it's quite interesting. It's similar to what you're saying. All of these guys who've come up with, the Velcro and the pumpkin latte, they've all thought about it because it started off with basic of coffee. What can we do with coffee? Let me do a bit of this, a bit of that, and things like that. So
that's a good way to think about it. I mean, like, when you think about anything, really, it all is like humans in general. If you want to think about like what we are, the reason why we're able to differentiate from other species is because our collective as a knowledge set compounds every like decade, every day, essentially. And when you combine all of our intelligence and you combine all of the knowledge that we've acquired, we've been able to go from a place where a rock was turned into a wheel, to a place where rubber was turned into a wheel, to a place where now these rubber tires can get a nail in them and they're still good to keep driving. Like all of that innovation happens because, to what you're talking about there, like the more you experiment, the more like breakthroughs you're going to have. And then the more breakthroughs you have, you compound that with other people's ideas and the breakthroughs they're having to kind of create the world around us. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the thing. So to see from this conversation, hopefully when someone listens to it or watches it, it will spark an idea in their brain, and that will match up. That will match up with maybe something they read earlier in the week or something their teacher said last year. You know, all those things
Exactly.
come together to create a new experiment, and then that person will help spark someone else in the world. So it's an amazing thing when you think about it, how everyone's thoughts and ideas and experiments connect.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
so true. I love it. Yeah.
How have experiments shaped your life? Like, what are some of the things that you've been doing?
Yeah, so for me, there's a lot of experiments that I've run over the years. I've published a lot of them online. You can read about some of my experiments with different channels. One thing that I think is important to talk about when it comes to experimentation is recognizing that not every experiment is going to be a raging success. Like a lot of people think that if you experiment with things, you're constantly going to always get wins. When I first tried to experiment with Reddit, I got banned immediately. Like I got blocked off of the site. They were like, no, bye Felicia, you're out of here. You can't use our website anymore. And I had to bounce back and try to experiment again. So I started to research what content was ranking at the top of Reddit, reverse engineered that, and started to kind of really understand what it was that Redditors want and why marketers couldn't give people that. Once I started to study it and started to realize that there are different trends depending on the subreddit that you're in, I started to quickly understand, okay, now if I can look for an insight in the top 20 posts that have been put on this subreddit of all time, I can use that to reverse engineer what type of content these people want. And that was an experiment that I've run, and I've since written a book about Reddit marketing and how you can crack the code. But it doesn't end with just Reddit. Like I've experimented with new projects. I've experimented with skydiving. I've experimented with going into new industries and a variety of different things. So for me, it's just constantly experimenting and trying to unlock new ideas and new opportunities.
So let me ask you this then. From what you're saying, it takes a bit of courage to do that, because you don't know if you're going to fail or if it's going to be a winner. And I guess you have to be able to take the risk. One of the videos you actually posted a little while ago was of Jay-Z, and talking about that's it. He was talking about his fears. Oh, sorry, other people's fears being projected onto you. So let me ask you this: what fears have you faced or had to sort of challenge yourself with?
Yeah, so when I was in, I'd say high school and even junior high and elementary, my nickname was Shy Ross. I was a very shy kid. My friends weren't creative. That was the nickname they gave me. And it was just known in school that I was a shy kid. I didn't raise my hand. If the teacher was going to ask people a question, I would look away. But I overcame that in university. I decided that I was going to start putting my name in the hat to speak at events, because I read a book and it said that two of the most important skills that you can have are public speaking and relationship skills. So I was like, okay, I need to double down on this public speaking thing because I have zero public speaking skills. So I started to force myself to get a little bit uncomfortable, started to sign up for these events, started to speak more and more frequently. And over time, while at first I sucked and I failed and I struggled and I was looking like I was in a wet t-shirt contest because I was sweating so much, I eventually got to a point where now I've been able to speak in front of thousands of people all over the world and get paid to do so, all because at first I was willing to get uncomfortable. So that's one of the experiments that I ran with, not knowing this is an experiment, more of let me jump into this thing and go head first. And it worked out at the end of the day.
So, I mean, when you read that thing in the book where it said, relationships and what was the thing? Relationships and
public speaking.
Public speaking. Yeah. So obviously you must have read many other things, alongside that at university. Why was it those two things in particular, or public speaking in particular, that stood out to you as I need to jump on this?
Right. Yeah. So the exact line was, if you want to be different from everybody else in the industry and you want to differentiate yourself, all things being equal, you have the same skills, same talent. The things that could differentiate you were the people and your ability to work a crowd and work a room and that kind of thing. So to me, it was like, okay, if I want to differentiate myself, I'm walking across this stage, getting a marketing and HR degree, just like everybody else in the world. How can I separate myself? I need to understand public speaking. So I doubled down on that skill and said, that's something I need to embrace. At the same time, I did get lucky because I jumped into digital marketing all through university as a passion and as something that I was just having fun with, running a fantasy football blog. But that turned out to be my career as well. And at the time, I was just doing it. And that also gave me that competitive advantage and differentiated me because I had knowledge in something that they weren't actually teaching in school.
No, that's interesting. I guess it comes from a hunger of wanting to be different, and it usually
Right.
comes about when you're that age of going to college or university, and you just feel like I'm with so many kids right now. Like, are we all headed in the same place? Like, I want to do something that's actually going to be exciting after this. Like, what comes next? Were there any big questions like that you were asking yourself? And is that the same time that you started Hustle and Grind?
Yeah, no. So I started Hustle and Grind like probably 5 years after I graduated. When I graduated from university, what was going through my mind was like, basically, I need to get out of my parents' basement and I need to be able to pay the bills. So at that point, I was like, okay, how can I hustle my way into an opportunity? And I always had like an itch to be an entrepreneur as well. So I just wanted to stand out. I wanted to set my path. I wanted to be successful, and I wanted to find a way to kind of break through the typical millennial lifestyle and get out of my parents' basement, essentially.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because Hustle and Grind is a page I've been following for a while, and when you're looking, it's good content for sure. So, and I see there's quite a few other famous people that follow you as well, like Jim Quick, for example. So it's good content. But what inspired you to build a page like that and then a company out of it as well?
Right. Yeah. So Hustle and Grind started as just a passion. So I was I had just left my job in the 9 to 5, started up my own advertising agency working with companies called Foundation Marketing. And then I said, okay, I'm doing all of this great work with clients, but I'm not talking to like young Ross. I want to talk to Ross when he was fresh out of school, trying to break into entrepreneurship, trying to build his own company, or even in that mindset of like, where do I go? What type of things should I be developing? What type of road should I follow to kind of get where I want to be? And then I said, okay, I'm just going to start putting up these posts on Instagram and see how people respond. And people loved it. Like, people started to kind of connect with it. Then I was like, okay, let's double down on illustrations and actually differentiate ourselves from what's in the market. A lot of people on Instagram were simply taking pictures of Leonardo DiCaprio and putting some nice text on it. I was like, let's invest in design and start creating our own illustrations. So I started to double down on that. The account started to reach like 50,000 people in the matter of a couple months. And I was like, wow, this is gonna last. And then people just started commenting and saying, Ross, can you turn this illustration into a t-shirt? Can you turn this into a hoodie? Do you offer this as a poster? So we turned that into an e-commerce store after realizing that there was a real demand for the illustrations, the artwork, and the mindset that we were kind of projecting. So for us, it really came down to that. And it's been amazing to watch how many people slide in our DMs on a daily basis telling us like, I just quit my job and it's all because of you guys. And I set up a side hustle before I left and I'm already making $4,000 a month. Like, when we start getting messages like that, it's pretty cool to know, like, right now I know that regardless of what happens in my life moving forward, I know that I had an impact on other people to do something that aligns with their own goals. So I'm good. Like, that's really the goal for me. It's to leave this world better than it was when I got here. And I'm pretty confident that I will be able to say that I did, which is cool.
That's amazing that you're able to say that, because there's not many people who can proudly say it, as confidently as you said it. So, and that's what this whole podcast is about, legacy. It's thinking about the bigger picture, where is it you want to end up? How do you want people to remember you? And what is it you're trying to create? So is Hustle and Grind something you're still working on actively now, or have you got other people looking after it for you whilst you're working on other projects?
Right. So yeah, no, Hustle and Grind I'm still actively working on. I was just talking to one of the members of my team a few seconds ago about our blog and how we're revamping that and making some modifications. But no, Hustle and Grind is still a project that's very close to my heart and something that I work on pretty much every day. You'll see on the Hustle and Grind stories, like I recorded a video in this t-shirt a few hours ago. And it's, again, just like something that I constantly am using. But I do have other interests, which is why I go back to that idea of experimentation. As long as I have time and I'm flexible and I'm able to like function correctly, like as long as I'm blessed enough to be able to do what I want, I'm going to keep experimenting with new ideas and new projects. I've got a handful of different websites that I run. I have a handful of different businesses. I have a handful of different projects that I've invested in. I love it. I love the game. I love entrepreneurship as a whole. I sit on a bunch of different boards. I just love the idea of waking up and trying new things, meeting cool people and doing cool things with them.
That's basically life, though, isn't it? Just keeping it as creative as possible and just making it into an adventure. I was just thinking
exactly.
that. I was just thinking that earlier in the day, actually, and I was thinking about. So I was listening to another podcast, and have you heard of The Buried Life?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was Ben Nemtin from The Buried Life. So he was talking about his journey and how he created The Buried Life and where the idea came from, and how they were playing basketball with Obama. And I was just like,
oh, that's
wow.
wild.
Like, wow. Like,
that
you know, who thinks of doing stuff like that? Like they just made a list of crazy things to do and just went out and did it. And
that's awesome.
This podcast was one of those things. I was just, I don't have a list of people to speak to yet. I don't know how I'm going to set everything up. You know, this microphone, I didn't have any of it. And I thought, let me just start, because I want to have conversations with interesting people and share the wisdom. And
that's cool.
Yeah. Once you start, I think you can't stop, can you? So
no, it's true. I love it. I think that podcasting is without question one of those opportunities for anybody who's looking to kind of connect with interesting people. It's a huge way to do it, right? Like you have the ability to kind of use your platform, not only to give value to your listeners, but gain value just from your dialogue that you're having with other people on a regular basis. So I'm going to flip the switch a little bit, but like when you think about the podcast, like what's the legacy that you kind of want to leave as a result of this?
So for me, this started out because I always had an urge to speak to people who were fascinating. You know, I wanted to have conversations and learn from every industry, not just entrepreneurship or business, but just life in general. Because you come out of school, because I was thinking this the other day, you come out of school and who teaches you? There's no set curriculum. You're not relying on a teacher anymore. You know, next semester, there isn't anyone giving you books or teachings or lessons. So who do you learn from? Where do you go? So I want people to start thinking about the long term. So for me, as long as I can get people to think about the one question is, how am I going to be remembered? If you can ask yourself that question, it changes every aspect of your life. Do I want to be remembered as a fat, lazy person? Do I want to be remembered as a broke person? Do I want to be remembered as a celebrity? Every area of your life gets thrown into question, because once you're gone, that's it.
That's it.
You know, you've left your stamp, and
it's true.
You can't change it. So you then start auditing every area, and slowly I'm doing that with every area of my life, bit by bit.
That's cool.
And I hope that other people can do the same. You know, and then I want to bring people like you who have already started doing that. You know, you're deep into your journey of auditing your life and creating something that matters. So it's just. I
love it. No, that's great, man. I like it. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, thanks. So, in terms of going back to the experimentation side, is that something you had as a child, like that curiosity of wondering, you know, why or what else is possible?
For sure. So like being from Canada, we still get some crazy winters. And back in the day, we used to get even crazier winters. And for me, I used to always be fascinated by this idea that when the winter would come, we get tons of snow. I'm talking like feet of snow. And the worms would just like disappear. So I used to ask myself, where are the worms? Where did the worms go? So one day I actually had an experiment where I took a bunch of worms out of the ground. I have this idea of build, ship, learn, decide. So I had to build my experiment. My build was taking a little bit of water, putting it in an ice tray, throwing some worms in it as well. I then had to ship my experiment. I shipped it by placing the worms in the refrigerator. And then if you ask my wife, you ask my parents, I have a horrible memory. I forgot all about these worms, and they were in the freezer for like 2 weeks. And then I'm watching TV with my dad, and I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom just screamed down, Ross Jarrell Simmonds, get up here. And I'm like, oh, the worms. I completely forgot. And then I realized that the worms died. And I also realized that Mama Simmonds wasn't pleased. So I would never do that experiment again. But that's kind of like my experimentation journey. Like even when I was a kid, I was trying to figure out like where the worms went and how they survived the cold. Turns out they all do like die, but they actually plant seeds, or like they lay eggs, and the eggs are what actually hatches. So the worms aren't the same year over year. They're different worms. But that was like, I figured that out like literally 2 years ago. But I did that experiment as a kid, and I've been embracing that idea without even knowing it was intentionally around experiments since I was a young pup.
It's funny because when you're that age, you don't question it either. Because
No,
if you were to think about that now, you'd be thinking about, what is my wife going to think, or what would my
right,
am I even sane for doing this? But
right.
back then, you're willing to just try it without realizing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's definitely an important trait to have.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it's something that we, even as adults, need to get back to. Like we need to get back to that idea of like experimenting with things. Unless something's going to burn down and like blow up, like you're okay to experiment. Like I think that's something that we all need to kind of get back to our roots of experimentation. Like the reason why we don't do those things anymore is because society has triggered us to think that you shouldn't do things that are a little bit weird. And at the end of the day, you need to have a laboratory to run an experiment where you're trying to see if a light bulb can make a grape turn into a raisin. Like that's another experiment I ran as a kid. But like those are the types of things that we should, as adults, still be willing to kind of experiment with.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's definitely an important trait. And is there any particular exercises or things that you tell yourself in terms of your mindset to get yourself into the mind frame of always thinking, am I being curious enough? Am I experimenting enough?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just like, the philosophy that I have is like, there's the things that there's the things that you don't know. And then there's the things that you don't even know that you don't know. And for me, I know that, and I know that there are tons of things that I don't know, and even more that I don't know that I don't know. And when I think about that on a regular basis, and when I'm humble enough to say, I know that I don't know everything, it forces you to constantly be trying to find answers to questions. So for me, it's just a mindset. Like I think everybody should be constantly trying to find answers to the questions, even if it's hard. Like a lot of the things that we don't know are just plain complex. They're over our head, so to speak, but it's okay to try to figure those things out and read about them. Like, I think that the worst thing that someone can have is always be set in their ways and never be willing to change their mind. Like, I think that you have to have firm opinions, but loosely held. I forget who said that. I think it might've been Paul Graham. But like that concept of having an idea, but being willing to have your mindset changed based off of experiments and based off of experiences, I think is very important.
Yeah, definitely is, because I think without that, you won't ever know what else is possible outside the realms of what you're already doing. So
yeah,
it almost limits you to an extent.
Yeah, like be curious. Like you were saying earlier around like interviewing people from different industries, right? Like that, I think on its own opens up so many opportunities. I have conversations with people in like the automation world. I have conversations with people in the automotive world, people in the plant-based cooking world. Like I have conversations with people from a variety of different industries, and it just opens your eyes to a wide range of different topics, which is always refreshing, but also keeps you humble to know like that you don't know it all.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because it keeps things fresh, because then you realize, oh, actually, what else don't I know? And then every time you find something you don't know, you just want to keep figuring it out. So
yeah, and one other way of like forcing yourself into the habit is like asking yourself on a weekly basis, like, what did I do that was pushing me outside of my comfort zone? What did I do that actually taught me something new? And if your answer is, I didn't learn anything new this week, if your answer is, I didn't try anything different or something scary this week, then you're probably not doing enough things that are outside of your comfort zone. You need to switch things up.
Yeah, I guess it starts from just doing one small thing, just changing, coming out of your routine completely. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It could be as simple as saying, I'm going to go on Amazon and buy a mic. And then I'm going to potentially have a podcast in the next few weeks. Then it's like 1 week I'm actually sending the email to Bill Gates to ask him to come on my podcast. Like those are the things that are experiments, and you might get an autoresponder from Bill Gates, and then you have an idea, oh, maybe I should start figuring out a way to get an autoresponder on my own email. Like all of these experiments are just like, again, going back to that compound approach. Like the more you experiment, the more you learn. And the more you learn, like the more opportunities you'll be able to unlock.
Yeah, and that reminds me of another quote from that book that I was telling you about earlier, where good ideas come from. And don't quote me on this; is not the exact quote, but he says something about there's a poet that says something about serendipity, because again, that feeds into getting a good idea. And you just said about autoresponder, and I think you set out to go in a certain direction, but you end up somewhere else. That's where that's what serendipity is. So for example, with the email thing, if you're new to email, you're naive enough to think, all right, I'm going to email Bill Gates. Fine. And you do it and you get an autoresponder. Then you think, I've never seen an autoresponder. Wow. Okay. So if you're out of office, you can automatically get a message, and then you start looking it up and then you have it for your own email. And you wouldn't have found that out had you not. See what I mean? So yeah, it's good stuff. So in terms of your content, you've been making content for a while now.
Yeah.
What do you think makes a good piece of content? As broad as that question is, are there any fundamental factors in 2018 specifically that would create good content?
Yeah. So I have the idea around kind of when it comes down to creating content, regardless of the industry, regardless of the kind of type of content you create, there's a philosophy that's been thrown around a lot. I don't know exactly who came up with it. Called the 3 E's. And the 3 E's are breakdown into, you need to create content that either entertains people. So that's content that makes people laugh, makes people smile. Maybe it makes them kind of feel good about themselves, makes them feel inspired. You also want to create content that engages folks. So that's content that starts up a bit of a dialogue maybe. So after they listen to your podcast, you have a call to action that's telling them to comment on this podcast and let them know something. That's an engaging piece of content. Or you have a video that is engaging and it has like rich storytelling that makes somebody think that they're in a different world or that they're experiencing something different. And then the final type is educational content. That's just content that provides you with insight and knowledge around something that you didn't do. So if the content that you're creating either educates someone, entertains them, or engages them, I think that you're on the right track to create something that is worth creating. And if it doesn't fall into one of those 3 categories, then I would say it's time to question whether or not this is a piece of content that you should actually put out.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a good way to break it down, an easy way to remember it as well, I guess. So out of those 3, what do you think people struggle with the most?
Good question. So I think the hardest one is entertaining content. I think that's why there's only so many stand-up comedians. Like not everybody can be an entertainer, so to speak. But like, I think entertaining content is definitely very challenging because at the end of the day, we all have knowledge, we all have our own experiences, so we can very easily educate people about what our life is like. We can educate people on our own personal perspective. We can educate people on things that we've done, but not everybody has the understanding and the EQ to understand how to entertain people, how to kind of engage them even in a one-to-one way that makes them feel like they're connected to you. So I think educational content is the easiest, followed by engaging, because really a lot of us do have EQ. But I think the most challenging is entertaining.
Okay. Yeah, no, that you make a lot of sense there, because you definitely don't see very many people who are successful in that industry. And the few that are, I think are the ones that have really created a big audience for themselves. So a lot of the attention in that space goes just to them. So
exactly.
In terms of now linking that to actual, people that are listening, if they wanted to improve their lives, what's the link between creating content in this day and age and allowing that to improve the quality of your life?
Right. So that's a great question. So I think content at its core is what everyone should realize is like at the foundation of the web. So when you look at the internet, the foundation of it all is content, right? Like when you go to Google and you're looking for an answer to your problems, when you're looking for an answer to how do you tie a tie, if you're looking for how do I start a business, should I drink kombucha, is this thing bad for me? Is this thing good for me? Like when you do any of that type of research, on the other end of those queries is content. So for you as a listener, like your opportunity is to think about the needs of the type of people you want to serve, and then ensure that you're creating content that they're more likely to find as a result of that. What type of content would give you the ability to have a positive impact in the lives of however many people you want to connect with, however many people you want to engage with? When you start to think about it from their perspective around what type of content they want, and you start to deliver that to them, you have an opportunity then to really start to kind of be seen as an authority in a certain space. You have the opportunity to be seen as a leader in a space. And because of that, they're going to trust you. And when people trust you, they're more likely to say, this is somebody that I want to be aligned with. This is somebody I want to work with. And then I always believe that like the more value you give the world, the more value you'll give back. So if you can serve more people with great content, then the world will serve you back with whatever it is that you kind of desire.
And do you think that people need to, because a lot of people find that, you know, maybe they don't have the right equipment, or they don't have an editing team or a videoing team behind them, whatever it might be, and then sometimes that can stop them? Because I know I've had those thoughts. I've thought,
yeah,